Well, I hope you're all ready for another episode of Random Stranger Explains Wargame Design. The rough outline of Sekigahara is a classic bit of wargaming, but the details, well, you'll see. For something that's an almost invisible niche of video games these days, wargames used to be a pretty big thing, at least on computers. The reason for that is wargames went from being a super obscure thing that militaries used to train their commanders to nerd hobby du jour in the 1960s, thanks to companies like Avalon Hill producing board games that let people play out historical battles. As time went on, there was a trend for these games to become more detail-obsessed. They had very complicated rule books that took into account hundreds of factors. And as all of this was happening, the computer revolution was getting underway. And those same people who were playing 10-hour war games on the weekends were programming those brand new computers during the day. A computer could handle the rules of the war game better than a human could, even if it might have trouble with the tactics. And so people started making war games on computers. And in the early days, it was a pretty big genre. Over time, things became more streamlined, and we've got more generalized strategy games. But there's still a dedicated fan base out there for games where you're moving units of an army across hexagons, playing out the fine details of a historical battle. And that brings me to Sekigahara. It is a wargame in that classic mold. You have two armies on opposite sides of a map made up of hexagons that they move through. Hexagons were used in wargaming because as regular polygons, the center of all adjacent hexagons are equidistant. Squares and triangles have a problem where they connect at corners. And like many classic wargames, Sekigahara lets the player step into the shoes of a commander at a historically significant battle. The Battle of Sekigahara is one of those pivotal turning points in history. In many ways, it acted as the capstone to the Sengoku period, the period in the 16th century when Japan collapsed into civil war and every feudal lord tried to make their own play to control the country. Sekigahara was the major confrontation between Hideyoshi's faction, who had managed to unite the country and then did a horrible job of keeping it together, and the Tokugawa faction, who were making their own play for power after the elder Hideyoshi died, leaving a young child as his heir. Historically, Tokugawa wins, and then proceeds to almost effortlessly mop up the rest of the country, unifying it under his rule as shogun. But this game gives you a chance to change that fate. In fact, you have to change that fate because the only side that you can play on is the Hideyoshi faction. The game plays out on a single map, and the two sides are designated as East and West. You have to play as the West faction, which is colored blue. At the start of the game, everyone's armies are in their respective castles on the far left and far right, and you have to select the castle, then pick the army, and then move it out from the castle. On every turn, you can move one unit. You have 15 under your control. Every time you move a unit, you get this little cutscene of that unit's general giving the order. Now you might think that this would slow the game to a crawl, and to that I say, you ain't seen nothing yet. Sometimes after you move your unit, there'll be an encounter with a ninja. Depending on circumstances, and these are totally out of your control, they might give you some information on the enemy, which will raise or lower morale, or they might just assassinate the general, eliminating that army instantaneously. This happened to me when I was moving my units for a pincer attack, and I thought, wow, that's strange. And then I moved another army on that side up, and the exact same thing happened again. What was happening is that the ninja events occur in particular spaces. So if you stop on that particular space on the southern road, your army just gets erased. At this point I should mention that I was thinking none of this game makes any sense. Every game design element I was encountering was a terrible idea. I had to be missing some key aspect of gameplay, something that let you control your armies properly, or let you manage the ninja. So I dug up a manual, read through it, and found out that no, I had everything exactly right. But the manual did tell me how you save your progress in the game. You have to have a Ten no Koei 2 memory bank attached to the system to do this, and then you just click on this unmarked pond in the middle of the map. No, seriously, that's how you save your game. When two units very eventually come into contact with each other, nothing happens. You see, they have to deploy for battle before they can fight, and this can only occur in 8 designated zones on the map, 1 around each of the castles, and the other 6 covering the crossroads area at the middle of the map. A unit that's in one of these areas can choose to deploy instead of move, and then you get the battle map view where you can choose to set down your armies. Only 2 armies can be deployed in a battle map area at a time, so if you deploy 2 of your forces, then it seems like the enemy forces can't deploy. Or at least I'm going off the manual here. And if the enemy choose not to deploy their forces, then nothing happens. You don't get to attack, you don't wear them down, you don't do anything, they just sit there. They can sit there doing absolutely nothing for turn after turn after turn. Now, eventually, I was able to get an enemy to deploy and then confront them in battle. This occurred 56 minutes into my recording time. If you're wondering why I have so much footage of just armies kinda bunched up on opposite ends of the map, that's because this game plays that slowly. There's also weather and a day-night cycle that affects your units, and they all have morale as well. If morale drops too low, then they just quit. They'll get yellow flags instead of blue or red, and that seems to happen almost at random. There are the ninja events that can affect it a little bit, but you don't have any significant control over that. For the close-up battle maps, at least you can move all of your units on a turn. They have the option to either move or attack. They can't do both. And your goal on the battle map is to attack the general unit and kill them. But the general can't move or attack, and wherever it got plunked down by the game when you decided to deploy is where they're stuck. You don't know where the enemy will be coming from. I deployed here thinking that I was blocking the approach, and instead they got dropped randomly just a couple of hexes away from my general. At least the animations when they fight are good. You'll just have to go a long way to see them. And there you go. Repeat this for 4 or 5 hours at least, until one of the castles is captured. From what I could find of Japanese players for Sekigahara, the response is muted at best. There's a lot more interest in talking about the history of the battle than there is talking about the game itself. And I think my opinion should be obvious at this point, but just in case it isn't, this is really bad. The game is painfully slow. Not just thoughtful strategy game slow, it's slow because doing anything takes forever. It'll take 6 or 7 turns to get a unit from the castle to the battlefield. If you want to do it strategically and move everyone together, then you're looking at closer to 50 turns. Morale is vitally important, but it's managed by factors that are completely out of your control the first time you play, and then trivially easy to manipulate once you know all of the hexes where the ninja are hiding. Once you're actually fighting, the combat system is broken, so there's not even anything interesting there. Sekigahara is a really bad game. Bad in ways where you kinda have to know how war games are supposed to work before you can understand just how off the rails everything has gotten. I'm only scratching the surface here, because I had to stop recording once I finally got into combat. I couldn't explore any of the fine details there. Sekigahara is virtually unplayable. Just a rotten game down to its very core.